Hey guys, it's me, Amaterasu, back with another video. Before you ask, yes, this is a different voice, but don't worry, I'll only be using this voice for intros and maybe outros. Well, the one I always use will be used in the actual what if / storytelling. But back to what I was saying, this is part 4-2, A Hero of Solar and Lunar by SYFY78, aka, what if Deku could control the sun and moon? Anyways, I hope all of you enjoy this video, but without further ado, roll the intro.
Hey Ross, sauce it up. Boys, my wheels got in my bag and I got out my field. I'm getting this paper, I'm stacking a meal. I'm with your hoe in the house on the hills. Yeah. I'ma keep it real, at the sacrifice and try to get my bands up. Shorty wanna fuck with me, she see me on the camera. She said she in love with me, but really I can't stand her. She just want part of this life cause she see me on the ground.
Chapter 12, The End. She's going to be alright, Sonny. However, she did have several fractures and cracks along her ribs. The bones in her right arm shattered. And she also suffered a concussion. Other than that, nothing really life-threatening at the moment. Anyways, your match is about to start. Please, go on ahead, don't worry about her and just focus on your match. And quad. Recovery girl said as she checked a couple of stuff on her clipboard, not looking up from it. Midoriya was still pretty nervous about Yaoyorozu, but he nodded and walked out of the infirmary, not before looking back at his girlfriend's face as the door slowly came into view. He then slowly made his way over to the arena, hearing the cheers of the crowd from the tunnel. His face grew into a grim expression as he entered the center, focusing only on what's front of him. All other sounds were blocked out for the duration of his walk to the arena, and his gaze focusing on the person on the other side. Looks like you've come, Deku. I'm going to enjoy kicking your nerd ass to the curve, Bakugo yelled out, but didn't receive a reaction from the green-haired kid, pissing him off. Veins bulged from the blonde kid's forehead as he stepped forward viciously, and explosions fired off in the boy's hands. Midoriya snickered inward on Bakugo's attempt at being strong. And then his entire demeanor changed. The air suddenly became colder as the sun suddenly dimmed tremendously, causing everyone to question what was going on. Midnight watched the two boys and shuddered when she saw the expression Midoriya had on his face. She was ensnared by his dull gold eyes that held anger and hate, but looked so captivating to her. She then made her way to the platform. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final match of the festival. Izuku Midoriya of Class 1A will face off against Katsuki Bakugo of Class 1A in this head-to-head fight. After this fight, the medals will be given out after this match ends, so do stick around for that, Midnight said as she raised her whip high in the air, and the cheering only got louder and louder. Midoriya stared at Bakugo before clenching his fists, and the familiar glow of the solar energy in surrounding his fists. Bakugo had a wild look on his face as he got into position. Both of them were focused on each other. Midnight started to feel pity for the blonde kid, just a little, as he had nearly killed a very gifted hero candidate. But what she felt pity for the boy was the fact that Midoriya's eyes were basically hollow to the point as was very intimidating to look at. Midnight sighed and began the countdown. 3, 2, 1, let the battle commence, Midnight yelled out and the crowds roared with excitement. Bakugo grin grew as he charged straight at Midoriya, who just stood there. Fucking die, Deku, he yelled out and thrusted his hand forward, but before he could fire off an explosion, he suddenly felt his face forced upward, and then he was kicked to the ground. In a daze, the blonde tried to get up, but was blasted to the side by a solar wave. Bakugo's temper was rising as he quickly recovered and fired off an explosion in what he thought was Midoriya's general direction, not noticing the green-haired kid's presence behind him until it was too late and was sent sprawling to the ground. Bakugo spat on the ground as he got up, seeing Midoriya standing there passively. He then used his explosions to quickly close the gap between the two, but then his face suddenly met a fist as he dropped to the ground, clenching his face, but growled out in anger from being brought down by a nerd. Damn it, Deku. I'll fucking kill you, Bakugo yelled out, but then was kicked in the stomach and then was blasted by several more rays of light. He then suddenly crashed into something hard. He looked to see a mirror floating, and grew angrier as he snapped his head towards Midoriya, whose hand was glowing from controlling the object. He saw red as he blindly charged at his childhood friend, but also forgot about the mirror, and was blasted from behind by it, and as he was falling, he saw the mirror materialize in front of him. He quickly used his quirk to force himself away from the mirror, only to come into contact with Midoriya's leg, sending the blonde back at the mirror. His face collided with the mirror, and then was blasted again in the face by the object, and ended up crashing into the arena floor. Anger exploded in Bakugo as he charged straight at Midoriya, using his explosion to send him at him. But Midoriya disappeared in front of him, which caused a few seconds of hesitation, and that gave Midoriya enough time to blast Bakugo with several rays of light, and the punched Bakugo's abdomen. The force of the punch knocked the wind out of the blonde as he was sent flying and then dropped to the ground, landing with a loud crash. Bakugo laid there as he was losing against Midoriya, and that triggered something in the boy, and it wasn't very angelic. A huge explosion fired off from the area the blonde was in, catching Midoriya's attention. "Fucking, Deku, you're pissing me the fuck off, you piece of nerd shit." Bakugo growled out animal-like and charged once again at Midoriya, which caused the green-haired kid to sigh and stood there. Bakugo grinned wildly and thrusted his hand out to Midoriya's face. "Die." He fired off the biggest explosion ever made, causing a couple of people to gasp in shock, and a cackle from the blonde as he blasted Midoriya to shreds. All of a sudden, a hand grabbed Bakugo's face and threw him a couple of feet away. His face grew into one of shock as he saw Midoriya unharmed by the explosion. "How?" Bakugo's voice began to crack a bit from the lack of damage, and his anger also grew when he noticed a smirk forming on Midoriya's face. "How indeed, Kachan. Maybe it was on the fact that you're not strong enough to beat me, nor even hit me whatsoever. Anyways, the real reason why you didn't hit me is because I temporarily made myself go into light mode, or more precisely, a form made from light, so you couldn't hit me even if you wanted to dot and quat," Midoriya said conspicuously, which made Bakugo even madder. "Damn, Deku, with your smug ass," Bakugo yelled out and launched another explosion, but his eyes widened when he saw it being absorbed by Midoriya's shield. Midoriya grinned as he grabbed the mirror and threw it straight at Bakugo, which was too fast for the human eye to follow, and Bakugo was sent flying by the force of the mirror. A pained groan came from the blonde as he struggled to get up, but then was sent straight into the ground by Midoriya axe kicking him to the ground. Pain was all over his body as he felt overwhelmed by Midoriya's power, but his pride wouldn't let him end it here. Through sheer pride, he got up and glared at Midoriya. Boo as before, it didn't affect Midoriya one bit. Then, in the blink of an eye, Midoriya appeared right in front of him and punched square in the face. A sickening crunch was heard as the blonde was sent flying, dust kicking up from the landing, and a low groan was heard from Bakugo. Midoriya glanced down at his fist, seeing the metallic-tasting liquid across his knuckles, and then casually flicked his wrist, splattering almost all of the blood on the floor, and held his gaze at struggling Bakugo trying to stand up. Blood was dripping down his nose as he gripped at it, noticing the unnatural way his nose felt, and then he realized what had happened. He growled and turned his gaze to Midoriya, clenching his nose, and then once more charged at him, but he didn't get far as he coughed out as he lurched forward, as Midoriya elbowed him in the gut. Then the green-haired kid delivered several swift kicks to the sides and then light-stepped behind the unsuspecting boy. "What the F***? Bakugo was cut off as he felt his vertebrae basically snap as Midoriya delivered a solar-infused roundhouse, knocking the wind out of the blonde as he tumbled onto the ground, groaning in tremendous pain as he struggled to gain a solid footing in the fight. The feeling of being knocked around pissed him off, but the lack of being able to pissed him off even more. He scowled and tried to get up, watching as Midoriya just watched him, even letting him stand up. Bakugo roared in anger as he resorted to what he always used, a wild style of fighting that always worked out in the end. Midoriya, however, saw it as desperation move and relaxed his body. Anticipating his attack, Midoriya swiftly dodged the sloppy punch and countered with his mirror, bashing him in the side and Spartan kicked him down to the ground. "Are you ready to give up, Kachan? You're slacking in your attempts. And quat," Midoriya said, towering above his opponent with a voided expression, and the tone of his voice sent shivers down Bakugo's spine. But the boy growled and fired off an explosion, hitting the boy head on. A wild grin on his face, as he watched the dust settle, only to see Midoriya with a little bit of sod and dirt on his face, but other than that, he was relatively unharmed. His eyes, however, held an enormous amount of power and a small amount of pity. "My turn. And quat," Midoriya muttered before reeling his fist back, unconsciously using Ofa alongside the solar energy and punched, releasing an unimaginable amount of power, wind, and solar energy at Bakugo. He then quickly light-stepped behind the boy and grabbed the boy from behind, tossing him straight into the released energy. Bakugo's eyes widened as he met the attack head-on, and pain soared throughout his entire body, and he couldn't help but cry out in pain as it was too much for the blonde to take. A huge amount of energy was released when the attack connected, causing a blinding light to flash the entire stadium. In that time frame, Midoriya quickly launched several rays of light at the still conscious boy, watching the red eyes watch his every move, and then with a final moment left, Light stepped in front of the boy and simply held out his fist. Bakugo watched as Midoriya's fist got closer and closer until his face collided with the fist, and all he saw after that was black. Midoriya watched the boy's body crumple to the ground unconscious. The light dimmed and people adjusted their eyes, blinking as they saw the dust settling, and then saw Bakugo's unconscious form and Midoriya towering over him. Midnight fixed her glasses and raised her hand high in the air. Katsuki Bakugo is defeated, making Midoriya the winner. She then noticed Midoriya's eyes return back to their normal, and then they rolled to the back of his head. The boy began to fall down, but then ice formed behind him, and Midoriya safely landed on it. Midnight turned to see Todoroki holding his hand out before sighing and looked at the risque hero. Ems, Kayama. And quat, Todoroki said before turning on his heel and walked out of the center. Midnight blinked before slowly making her way over to the two boys, first checking on Bakugo, sighing when she felt his pulse. Then she checked on Midoriya, and saw his chest was rising and falling at a constant pace. She sighed in relief before turning towards the UA staff booth. Principal Nezu stood up, getting out of the chair and walked towards the exit. Toshinori and several other teachers watched as the animal-like creature strode to the doorway. I would like for the UA staff to head towards the conference room. We need to discuss the situation with young Bakugo. And quat, Nezu said before exiting the booth. Slowly, people started to file out of the room, leaving Toshinori staying. He looked out the window, seeing the recovery bots lifting Bakugo off of the ground. What went wrong with him? I am proud of Midoriya, though. However. And quat, Toshinori reverted back to All Might as he watched the retrieval of Midoriya. His aptitude with Ofa doesn't match how much he uses it, although he unconsciously powered some of the attacks he used. I'll need to teach him that. His power is growing tremendously though. And quat, All Might thought before reverting back to Toshinori and then made his way out of the booth, sending notices to Midnight, Cementos, Present Mike, and Aizawa. Midoriya's eyes widened as he quickly sat up, and then was quickly whacked on the head by Recovery Girl. He rubbed his head and turned towards the older woman, and then he saw Yaoyorozu sitting right next to the lady. He smiled and then noticed the bandages wrapped around his forehead. What happened? Midoriya asked, trying to remember what happened before he had passed out. When he came up with nothing, he glanced at Recovery Girl, who shook her head, then turned to Yaoyorozu only to get the same answer. He sighed and laid his head back on the pillow. Izuku, you won the tournament by beating Bakugo, however, there were reports that you weren't yourself during that fight. The most notable change was your eyes. Normally your eyes are a bright gold color when you power up. Your eyes during the match was a dull, hollowed gold. Plus, the light you gave off during the match was a lot colder than what people usually felt from you. This is what several people including Uraka and Tsuyu, along with several others from our class. Oh, they also came a couple of minutes ago to visit you. And quat, Yaoyorozu said as she looked at him concerned. Midoriya's eyes widened as he looked at his fist and clenched it, many emotions running through his mind. I lost control of myself? It must have been when Bakugo injured Momo, that's right. When I saw him doing that, I saw red and was about to jump in to pummel the living crap out of him. Damn it. My emotions got the best of me, damn it. I need to control them. And quat, he thought as he powered Ofa through his arms, and grew shocked at how weak it was compared to previous attempts from using it. He bit into his thumb as he came up with many explanations as to why this was happening to him. It must be that I haven't really been using Ofa at all. I mostly been focusing on Celestial Homage and what Amaterasu's words. That must be why I'm lacking the power now. I'll talk to All Might once I get the chance to. And quat, Midoriya thought before relaxing his eyes, breathing in. He turned to Yaoyorozu and smiled, grasping his hand with both of hers. The warmth flowed through the two of them. Recovery Girl smiled and turned around to check Bakugo's condition. Midoriya followed her path, seeing the bedridden Bakugo and instantly felt anger welt inside him, but he suppressed the emotions and glanced over him. Did I do that? Midoriya turned to Recovery Girl. The older woman nodded solemnly and went back to checking on him. The green-haired kid looked down sullenly, incredibly guilty for what he had done, but secretly enjoyed beating down his bully for almost all of his lifetime, even if he didn't truly remember what went down during the match. He then sat up and swung his legs off of the bed, letting them dangle to the side and faced Yaoyorozu. So, when's the ceremony? Midoriya asked her. In about 10 minutes from now. Izuku, are you alright? She asked, concern on her face, but it also a hint of mirth in her eyes. He smiled and placed his feet on the ground, and then gingerly stood up, almost falling face first. Yaoyorozu quickly grabbed onto him, holding him still. Trust fall? She joked and helped him stand upright, earning a thank you from Midoriya. She took a glimpse at his eyes, seeing the green and gold pool. She let out a soft chuckle before turning around to grab her stuff. Midoriya then eyed the cast she had on her arm and looked down in guilt, but he quickly looked up, catching the gaze of Yaoyorozu. A look of concern on her face, but he shook his head and followed her. Once Recovery Girl did a final checkup and gave them the go, the two of them went their way towards the center of the stadium, seeing all of the freshmen down there and several pro heroes alongside several UA staff. The two of them quickly went to Class 1A's section of the crowd, gaining a couple of relieved looks from several of their classmates. Small greetings were exchanged and they quickly went back to the speech Principal Nezu was giving. After going through several speeches from different people, All Might appeared, holding several medals in his buffed arms. "Hello, freshmen, I am here. I would like to present these medals to the placeholders. In third place, Ibara Shiozaki and Momo Yaoyorozu. Please come up to the stage." The two girls nodded and made their way to the stage, stopping in front of the number one hero, small smiles threatening their lips as they stared in amazement from meeting the greatest hero ever. All Might stepped forward, placing the bronze medals around their necks and smiled widely. "Congratulations to the two of you, young ladies. Great job and continue to go beyond plus ultra." In second place, Katsuki Bakugo, but he is currently in the infirmary. So, in first place, Izuku Midoriya. Loud cheering boomed throughout the stadium as the nervous boy stepped forward, a little unsettled from the amount of applause he was receiving. He quickly made his way to the stage, locking gaze with his mentor. The two shared a small moment of pride as Midoriya stopped in front of All Might. The hero brandished the gold medal and placed the medal around his neck. The two smiled as they locked gazes. "Well done, my boy," All Might said to Midoriya. The boy nodded and quickly made his way back to his spot next to Yaoyorozu and watched as the closing ceremony came to a wrap. Applause rang through the crowds as everyone dispersed the stadium. The freshmen all mingled with each other as they made their way out of the stadium, talking to each other about the festival. Midoriya smiled as he looked over the gold medal, seeing his reflection on the medal. He sighed as he exited the building, watching the stream of people and students converging together alongside several pro heroes watching the stream to make sure nothing went wrong. He waved goodbye to Yaoyorozu as she was talking with her parents. Midoriya saw a rich-looking man with a buff figure and raven short hair looking at him and gulped. But, the man just simply nodded at him and turned around to walk off. Yaoyorozu ran up to him and pecked him on the lips, blushing slightly, and waved as she ran to catch up with her parents. Midoriya blushed a little as he brushed his fingers against his lip and smiled. He was greeted by many people, alongside several agencies and people who watched the festival, giving the young boy praise for his performance in it. The flowing leaves weaved past the trees in front of the stadium, and the sun-setting sky looked very colorful and beautiful. Midoriya gazed at the sky before looking through his phone, checking to see if he had anything to do as they had the next 2 days off. "I have nothing to do. I guess I'll just rest for the 2 days, but man, this festival has been very stressful and tense. Midoriya said, pocketing his phone and walked to his house. Inko greeted him with a warm smile and embraced her son. "I'm proud of you, Izuku. I was a bit worried about what Bakugo was doing to Momo, but it looks like she's alright. Anyways, I made some dinner for you. I'll be in my room if you need anything, dear." Inko said, releasing him from her embrace, and walked to her room, leaving Midoriya all by himself in the living room. He turned his gaze to the food and his mouth watered a bit, and quickly dug into it, moaning in delight at how good it is. Once he was done, he cleaned the plate and sat in his room filled with All Might merchandise. He chuckled before slipping out of his clothes and into the shower. "Man, what a day. Midoriya smiled as he finished up and slipped on his All Might pajamas and fell into the unconscious realm. In his dreams, Amaterasu sat at a table right in front of Midoriya's dream state. She poured some tea and offered it to him, which he took and sat down across from her. "So, Master, how was the tournament?" she asked, sipping on her tea. Midoriya sighed exasperatedly and shook his head. "Can you stop calling me Master? It feels weird when you call me that. He said, looking at the teacup. Amaterasu chuckled and placed her cup on the ground and looked at Midoriya. "Your emotions got the better of you, Master?" Midoriya sighed. "And that is something that is very dangerous, especially with your lunar energy. She stated. Her expression was on of seriousness, and all jokes were aside. Midoriya was caught off guard from the change, but he felt he needed the rundown on the situation and nodded for her to continue. "The reason it's dangerous is 1, obviously you'll lose control. The other is that it will negatively affect you in some way in the aftermath, like a migraine for starters, but it will grow increasingly worse the more it happens. Don't know what'll happen, but just assume the worst. Perhaps some training will help improve that, plus you're lacking lunar aptitude trailing behind your solar aptitude. You will most likely meet the lunar deity in these upcoming weeks. Amaterasu said before standing up from the table and strolled away from Midoriya, the area around her turning into a garden of sorts, still in contrast with the pitch black background. "Anyways, do try and keep your emotions in check. I'll take the migraine so that you won't suffer through it. However, the rest will fall all on you, Master. Goodbye for now. She said, and Midoriya's vision began to blur until he woke up in cold sweat, breathing heavily. He sighed, closing his eyes for a brief moment before glancing at his alarm clock, seeing that it was now morning of the next day. "I guess I'll study some materials. So, Midoriya ended up staying in his house for the entire day, going over materials from classes while having a hero interview marathon going on in the background. He had just finished the section with most, if not, all of All Might's interviews. Hearing the laughter of the number one hero put a smile on his face as he continued to write down anything he deemed important or interesting. The day went by pretty quickly, and before he knew it, it was the next day, and school was back in session. Yawn, my back hurts. And quat. Midoriya rubbed his back and glanced around the train car, noticing the festival was playing on one of the little advertisement cycles. He paid no attention to those and continued to stare at the window, but was soon tapped on the shoulder. He turned and saw a middle-aged man looking at him with admiration, causing the boy to raise an eyebrow. You're Izuku Midoriya, right? The winner of the UA Sports Festival? I watched the whole thing, and your performance was amazing. A big fan of yours. Midoriya blushed as he thanked the man, but the outburst also caught everyone's attention and they all began to swarm him, ensuing mass panic. After several attempts trying to escape the mob, Midoriya managed to duck his way onto the platform, thanking everyone and dashed towards the academy. The familiar wave of UA uniforms commuting towards the greatest hero academy in the planet, dare Midoriya say. Good morning, Midoriya. He heard someone from behind say, causing the boy to turn and saw Ida running towards him. He blew past him and continued to run towards the gate entrance. Midoriya, slightly perturbed, quickly ran after his friend to their classroom. The two arrived at their class and entered it, seeing some of their classmates already there. Midoriya waved at Yaoyorozu before taking note of the arrangements of the desks. What's up with the desks? He asked Ida, who shook his head. He then turned to Yaoyorozu, but she also shook her head. Midoriya looked at the rest of the people that were in the classroom, but they weren't paying attention. He sighed and sat down on one of the desks in front of Yaoyorozu. They ended up conversing with each other while the rest of the class arrived in the next couple of minutes. Soon, everyone had taken a seat. Well, everyone that was there. Soon, Aizawa walked in and placed a stack of papers on the desk. Listen, we have a new transfer coming in today to replace Bakugo's place. And quat. Aizawa said, surprising almost all of the students, except for Yaoyorozu, Midoriya, and Todoroki. People were about to question the news, but Aizawa held his hand up, effectively shutting everyone up. I'm sure you have a ton of questions, but first, the introduction. Please, come in. And quat. Everyone turned towards the door and the person stepped in, causing many people to gasp, especially Kaminari and Mineta because the person was a girl. The person stepped towards the front of the class and smiled at everyone. Hello, my name is Ibara Shiozaki. I was originally Class 1B's vice representative, but I passed on that position to Tetsu. A pleasure to meet almost all of you. And quat. Shiozaki eyed Kaminari when she said the last part, causing him to only smile at her, causing a frown to appear on the Vine girl's face. She then walked towards Midoriya and took the empty seat beside him and gave him a warm smile, which he reciprocated. Since Shiozaki transferred to Class 1A, we had Hitoshi Shinso move to Class 1B. As for Bakugo, he is currently in reformation and then will be placed in the general studies. He will not be able to test for his hero's license until he is deemed safe for heroic duties, which will still take a long time since he did almost kill Yaoyorozu. Anyways, now that's out of the way, the next thing on the agenda is your hero names. And quat. Aizawa stated. People were excited while others were dreading this day, but when Aizawa stated that Midnight was going to supervise the naming, people Mineta were a lot more giddy about the whole thing. The naming process was pretty long as people were taking their time with their names, and soon, people made their way to the front and presented their names to the class. After a while, it was Midoriya, Shiozaki, Ida, and Todoroki were left. Both Ida and Todoroki opted to use their given names, leaving Midoriya and Shiozaki to reveal their names. Midoriya ended up using Deku as his hero name, and many people questioned it, asking if it was truly what he wanted. He stated that he wanted that name to be one that was seen as a hero, and not a timid, useless boy. Needlessly to say, everyone was behind Midoriya after his little speech. Then, Shiozaki came up to the podium and presented her whiteboard to the class. Please, call me Saint Vina. And quat. Chapter 13, The Real World Experience. After the festival, flashback. Toshinori looked around the table at his fellow heroes and faculty were looking through papers or discussing the festival. He then turned his gaze over to the head of the table, Principal Nezu. Aizawa looked bored as usual, but he had a different air around him than what he usually carried, which caught the man by surprise. After some time, Nezu cleared his throat and looked at everyone before fixing a stack of papers. Okay everyone, we're here to discuss the future of young Katsuki Bakugo and his path to being a hero. He was ideally a great candidate for being a hero via his combat prowess. However, the methods he imposed are questionable. And quat. The animal-like creature stated, looking calm as ever. Everyone listened intently to what he was saying, and nodded before ruffling through some of their own papers. Midnight stood up and coughed to get everyone's attention. Listen, Bakugo almost killed a fellow classmate, Momo Yaoyorozu. She was recommended through her quirk and academic achievements, a pinnacle of the hero course. Her career could have been ruined if his actions were allowed to go any further hadn't we stopped him from doing so. And his disqualification at the festival would have been a clear statement that we don't accept that type of behavior in the hero course. And quote. Midnight stated, looking over to Cementos. He nodded and stood up as well while Midnight took her seat. In my opinion, the reason why Midoriya challenged Bakugo was to put him off of his high horse. Another reason may be that it was an act of unforgiveness against Bakugo. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu have a good relationship of friendship or maybe something even greater than that. Anyways, I believe that Bakugo shouldn't be in the hero course, as the media saw what happened and of course there were many complaints of his behavior. Principal Nezu, the reason why you allowed Bakugo to be in Class A was that with the expectations of the course that he would change for the better. And quote. Cementos looked at Nezu and awaited his answer. The bear-like principal sighed and nodded before grabbing Bakugo's transcript off of the table. That is correct, Cementos. Even with the previous events and the whole thing with young Midoriya during their younger years, I thought that he would have matured to the point where yelling death threats would have ceased. However, his temper has seemed to gotten worse mainly on the fact that Midoriya here is outshining him in every aspect. And quote. Nezu said sadly, causing several people to mutter amongst themselves. Toshinori was looking at his stacks of papers, but wasn't really into this kind of meeting. He really wanted to avoid this conversation, but he knew that it was inevitable since it was a nationwide event. Plus Yaoyorozu's family were pretty livid when they saw their daughter nearly dying out there. He wasn't there when the two influential parents of the hero world wanted to speak with Nezu and Aizawa. He swore he could hear the furious shouts. He sighed and buried his head into his hands. He had very high hopes of Bakugo, regardless of the blonde's previous nature, but now I think we should drop Bakugo from the hero course. He doesn't belong in it anymore. And quote. Everyone turned to Aizawa, who had a very bored expression on his face. His sleeping bag was right next to him and he was fixing to get into it. His actions aren't heroic. Like all of you, I had some belief that he would improve his behavior. However, it has gotten worse. I believe the main triggers was being overshadowed by Midoriya, and his near defeat by Yaoyorozu. To summarize, it was his inflated ego from his quirk. Either way, I don't want him in my class anymore. And quote. Aizawa said before slipping into his sleeping bag and dozed off, earning a couple of sighs from his coworkers, but they agreed with his reasons. Nezu had a troubled look on his face, but after a couple of minutes, he placed his paws on the table and looked at all of them. I regret to say this, but as of now, Katsuki Bakugo will no longer be a part of the hero course and will not be able to participate in any hero internship. Since young Bakugo is no longer a part of the Class A, we will need to transfer over a Class B student into A, and one from the general studies over to B. I believe that this will be the best course of action, and I believe the best transfers will be Hitoshi Shinso from the general studies, and ... And quote. Nezu turned to Vlad King. Ibara Shiozaki from Class B. And quote. Toshinori had to admit that the choices laid out were pretty much the best options that each area had to offer. He was still upset that Bakugo was getting kicked out of the hero course, but he conceded to the principal's words. After the final decisions were planned out, they began the transfer papers for the three spoken during the meeting. However, the next day, I'm sorry, Mrs. Bakugo, but this is what we decided upon for the actions of your son. And quote. Principal Nezu solemnly said to the mother. Mitsuki just sighed and glanced at her son, who was seething in the couch, but she also saw the distraught on her son's face. The other parent, Masaru, was watching the expressions of his wife and son, but more towards the son. Mitsuki shook her head and looked at her son. Katsuki, it's your fault that this is happening to you. You can't even become a hero unless given a pardon, and even that's a long shot too. Damn it. What goes on in that thick skull of yours? She yelled at him, causing Bakugo to grit his teeth even further, but didn't say anything. Nezu just watched the family interact and couldn't help but feel a bit guilty for the outcome, but he stuck by the decision. The principal then rummaged through the bag he brought with and pulled out the boy's hero costume before placing it on the table in front of them. Bakugo stared at the piece of cloth being placed before standing straight up and stalked off to his room, leaving behind the looks of concern from Nezu and the apathetic look from Mitsuki. Don't worry about him, principal. I believe you done the right thing. I hope that with him being in the hero course, his attitude would have changed to match one a hero would have. I guess with Midoriya being in the class as well and being top student kind of set him off, I guess. But, I don't know about the Yaoyorozu girl or what she has done, but I will take full responsibility for my son's actions. Damn brat of mine. And quote. Mitsuki stood up and bowed before the animal-like principal, and soon, Masaru followed suit. Nezu climbed on top of the table and placed his hands on both of their heads. You needn't apologize to me, your son is a fine young man. I can tell both of you raised your son to the best of your abilities. Please continue to do so and help him with his rehabilitation so that one day he may become a hero. I bid you two a farewell. Ah, I almost forgot. Nezu then went over to his bag and handed Mitsuki a General Studies uniform. Mitsuki nodded and placed it on the table. After exchanging goodbyes, Nezu walked out of the Bakugos, and nodded to Aizawa and Midnight, and the three of them walked back to UA. How do you think it went? Midnight asked, fixing one of her hero costume's cuffs. All of a sudden, a loud explosion was heard from the house they were at and then was followed by a loud smacking noise. Ow! What the hell was that for, you MILF? Smack, is that how you address your mother? More explosions, curses, and shouting was heard from the house, causing the three staff members to look at the house in confusion. Nezu turned around and continued to walk, causing the other two to quickly join him. What a nice family, Nezu said, causing Midnight to sweat drop. She then turned to Aizawa, who was too busy staring in front of him to care about anything. She shook her head and pulled out her phone, checking the time, and then began to scroll through different news outlets, seeing the exact same coverage. She handed her phone over to Aizawa and watched as he scrolled through each of the headlines, reading through each one. All the media coverage is on Hasu, the hero killer, and the recent murders of heroes. The latest one was a hero named Ingenium, or real name Tensei Ida, older brother of Tenya Ida. Do you think? Midnight pondered out loud, causing Aizawa to let out a heavy sigh before handing Midnight her phone back and shoved his hands into his pocket. Ida's mood during the festival was strange, according to several students of mine, including Yaoyorozu. He also received a call during the festival, most have been that. And quat, Aizawa said before returning back to his aimless gazing, causing Midnight to sigh and pocketed her phone. Flashback, and that's crazy, Bakugo getting put into the general studies and being kicked out of the hero course. And quat, Kirishima said to Midoriya and Kaminari, as they were grabbing their lunch from the lunch line. The three boys eventually found a spot next to the entrance of the room. Of course it was going to happen to him. It was on live television, and of course people were going to take note of the brutality in his fighting. There were complaints during the Uraka fight, also. And quat, Kaminari said, setting his tray down. Midoriya followed suit and sat down, feeling the warm steam coming from the food and sighed happily. I'm not surprised that they kicked Kachan out of the hero course. His behavior wasn't exactly heroic. Plus, the media would have put UA on the chopping block for not doing anything that would have been a severe punishment as a result of his actions. And quat, Midoriya chimed in before going back to eating his lunch. The other two boys were lost in thought from what Midoriya said. An uncomfortable silence was created between the three boys, causing Midoriya to shift in his seat anxiously. Anyways, what do you think we're going to do today? Midoriya tried to break the ice, and to somewhat lift the mood a bit, but to no avail. Midoriya sighed and went back to eating his food, taking glances at Kirishima as the redhead picked at his food. Midoriya knew that Kirishima was trying to be Bakugo's friend, and it looked like their relationship was on good terms. Midoriya couldn't help but feel bad that Kirishima was feeling a bit down from the news. Personally, he didn't know what to feel about it. The rest of the lunch was relatively silent, as Kirishima and Kaminari both left to go do their own thing, leaving Midoriya to himself. He eventually left the cafeteria and wandered around the academy, coming across Kota and Sato outside enjoying the breeze. They chatted it up a bit before Midoriya left them to their own accord. Soon, Midoriya returned to the classroom, being the first to the classroom. He placed his stuff down next to his desk and sat on it. He fished out his phone and scrolled through his feed, seeing articles about the festival, and also the hero killer. His eyes darted across the screen, seeing the exact same cover of the exact same event. He shook his head and watched as people slowly trickled into the classroom, greeting each of them as they entered in. Once everyone was there, Aizawa walked in and laid a stack of papers on his little desk area. Alright, now is the time for internships. You came up with your hero names, and now, you're going to be getting actually experience in the field. The festival was a great way for many of you to get scouted for said internships. That being said. And quat, Aizawa grabbed a remote and pressed a button, and a screen popped up with everyone's names, including Shiozaki's. Then, a number appeared right beside it, with Midoriya being the one with the most, followed by Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and Shiozaki. But, the gap between Midoriya and Todoroki was massive. This year, almost all votes were focused in on Midoriya, Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and Shiozaki. Everyone wanted Midoriya after his prowess was revealed to the world, so that's why there is a huge gap between him and the rest. If you didn't get a recommendation, you will still get an internship. There will be 40 of them to choose from, and make sure you have your choice of internship in by the end of the week. Dismissed. And quat, Aizawa then walked out of the class with his sleeping bag in tow. Midoriya sighed and grabbed the stack of papers, then passed them out to their respected person. Everyone was discussing where they wanted to go, and some of them even had their choice already. Which one do I choose? Midoriya said to himself, seeing all the names of the agencies, but none of them appealed to him. He overheard Yaoyorozu talking to Todoroki about where she was going, and she ended up choosing Uwabami, the snake hero, which surprised him as she was notorious for prioritizing her celebrity work over hero work, but she's great at locating and detaining villains. Todoroki said he was going to mentor under his father, which also surprised him, but made sense. Midoriya gripped the doorknob and turned it, only to see a hunched over All Might right in front of him. "Hello there, young Midoriya. I would like to speak with you, and also bring young Shiozaki with you. Meet me at the usual spot, got it?" All Might said before dashing away, leaving only an afterimage of him. Shiozaki walked up from behind and peeked over Midoriya's shoulder. "Was that Mr. All Might? And I heard my name as well. Did he need something?" she asked. Midoriya turned and nodded, then began to lead the way to where All Might wanted them to be at. It was relatively a quiet walk as they reached the area and opened it, revealing All Might, Nezu, Aizawa, and finally, "Shinso?" Midoriya asked, seeing the now Class B student. He nodded to Midoriya and looked away, causing the boy to be confused. All Might smiled and ushered the two to sit down next to Shinso, which they did and awaited the occasion. "Thank you all for coming today. Now then, I would to start the meeting. As you may know, the internships are almost upon us, and did the three of you choose one yet?" Nezu asked the three, earning 3 no's from them. He smiled and sipped his tea. "I'm glad, it won't complicate things. Aizawa, if you please. And quad." Aizawa nodded and looked at Shinso directly in the eyes. "Shinso, would you like to intern with me? Now that you're in the hero course, you will need combat experience. You did come to me and ask if you could learn my combat style. Now is your chance to learn. Will you accept?" Aizawa asked, already knowing the answer. "I accept that offer. I need to beat this guy here, so I'll need everything I can get my hands on. And quad," Shinso said, then looked at Midoriya, a sly smile playing at both of their lips. Aizawa nodded, then Nezu looked at All Might, which he nodded and extended a hand to both Shiozaki and Midoriya. "Young Midoriya and young Shiozaki, would you like to intern with me and one of my colleagues? He is interested in you, Midoriya. As for you, Shiozaki, I can't help much with your quirk, but I promise you will get actually experience. Do you both accept?" All Might's grin widened as both of them nodded enthusiastically. All Might bellowed with laughter and Nezu nodded before placing 3 papers on the table, each with their names on it. "Sign here, and that's it. It will start on Saturday, so do report at the academy, you 3. Alright then, please all of you, do take care. And quad." Nezu adjourned the meeting and hopped off the couch to exit the room, followed by the rest besides Midoriya and All Might. "Listen, kid, the person that's supposed to come for the internship is my former homeroom teacher, and was a good friend of my predecessor and master. He knows about OFA, so be warned, he may be a bit hard to deal with. He thinks that I'm not training you well enough as he saw the festival and you not using OFA, almost as if it was a liability. And quad," All Might said, shuddering a little bit, causing Midoriya to grow fearful of the person, but then thought about it some more. "Wait, if he was your homeroom teacher, shouldn't he be in his upper years?" Midoriya asked. "Yes, he is. And quad," All Might continued to shudder, which caused Midoriya to sweat drop. "Then shouldn't we be going over to his place rather than him coming here? He may be of old age, but he is still quite powerful. Don't worry about him getting here, worry about it when he's here. He taught me how to fully control OFA, and I bet he's coming over here to do the same for you. Plus, he destroyed his house due to a microwave explosion, so I offered to let him stay in my place for a bit. It works out in the end, doesn't it?" All Might flashed Midoriya a grin. "I see, so, how do you feel about, Bakugo's suspension?" Midoriya asked, and then noticed the darkened look on the number 1. A loud sigh was heard from the hero as he fiddled with his thumbs. "Listen, Midoriya, there is nothing more grand than to guide the next generation of promising young children to become heroes. Young Bakugo was one of them, and he had potential to become a great hero. However, his actions were the cause of his current situation. It saddens me that he has strayed from the hero course, but in the end, there is nothing I can do but to lead the rest of you towards a bright future. Now, no more on the subject, it's getting late. Please, take care and do keep this a secret. Tell Shiozaki as well. And quad." Midoriya had a solemn expression, but nodded and walked out of the room, looking back one last time at All Might. "I guess I'll go with the flow until the internships. I wonder who All Might's mentor is. He must be pretty strong to have even All Might fear him. And quad." He walked out of the building, spotting familiar black hair waiting near the gate. Yaoyorozu heard footsteps and turned to Midoriya, flashing him a smile as he stopped in front of her. "Am I walking you home?" Midoriya asked as he started to walk in the direction of her house, and she quickly caught up to him, matching his stride. They engaged in conversation while he texted Shiozaki, telling her to keep the meeting a secret. His phone buzzed a couple of seconds later and she replied, agreeing to the plan, and then wished him a great day. He pocketed his phone and turned to Yaoyorozu, who was twirling a strand of hair with her fingers. Are you okay? What's on your mind? Midoriya asked. She sighed and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Listen Izuku, how do you feel about Bakugo's relocation to the general studies? Kyoka and Hagakure were discussing it alongside Ojiro and Sero at the lunch table earlier. Even some of the other students from the different courses were discussing it in the hallways during the passing periods. Most of the consensus was in favor of the relocation. She said as they both stopped by a small park and sat down in the swings. Midoriya gripped the chains and sighed. Regardless of my personal feelings, what happened is completely normal, probably the best course of action. He isn't in the hero course, but is allowed to attend UA as well. Of course it seems like the best outcome to Bakugo. Even so, there is still backlash with the decision. And Aunt Mitsuki has to live through it knowing her child was kicked out of the hero course. Maybe even the path to becoming a hero. This world is very unforgiving when it comes to villainous intent, and that's that I suppose. Midoriya concluded, causing a small frown to appear on Yaoyorozu's face, but she quickly masked it with a smile and started to swing back and forth. Anyways, did you already choose your internship? She asked, changing the subject. Midoriya perked up and nodded. Which one? She asked once more. Can't tell you, but I'll be working with Shiozaki for the week, kind of excited to be working with her. I know you're going to be working with Uwabami, which is surprising as she isn't a direct hero, more of the support role. Is that what you're going for in your hero career? Midoriya asked. Indeed, I do want to become stronger, but I feel like I can be more of use if I can learn more of a supportive role to help out more with containment and capture. Although, I'm still a little bit worried, since she is a celebrity and is usually on commercials for products. Yaoyorozu noted, already dreading what was to come. So, maybe I'll see you in a commercial alongside her, Momo. I'm sure you'll look great in it. He said, scratching his cheek in embarrassment. Yaoyorozu blushed a bit, but smiled and thanked him. It's getting late, we should go. I'm still a little bit anxious, but I'm sure it'll be a good experience. The two of them resumed their walk to her house. She smiled and pecked Midoriya on the lips before retreating into her house, waving him goodbye as he left the area. The next couple of days went by quickly as people soon decided on where they were going to be interning at, and soon, the first day of the internships arrived. It was a clear Saturday morning as everyone from Class A was all prepped up for the internships. Midoriya was talking to Uraka about her internship with Gunhead and how she was really excited for the trip. Wait Deku, how come you don't have your stuff with you? She asked him. I'll be interning around here, so I didn't really see the importance of bringing my hero costume, if that makes sense. Midoriya chuckled awkwardly, as his hero costume was already at the place he was going to intern. Uraka nodded and smiled at him, then looked over Midoriya's shoulder and started to wave enthusiastically. Hey, Ida, I'm glad to see you're doing okay. Where are you interning at? She said as she passed Midoriya and ran up to Ida, who had a small smile on his face as he looked at the bubbly girl. Yes, I'm fine, so there isn't anything to worry about. I'm glad to see the two of you in high spirits, Uraka, Midoriya. As for my internship, I choose the Hasu City Hero office as my place for training. I hope I can gain much knowledge from the experience. Ida said, causing Uraka to smile and congratulate him. Midoriya, however, watched Ida's every expression as he talked some more with Uraka. Something's off with him, as this still about his brother? What's more is that he chose Hasu as his area for internship. That's where the hero killer has been currently situated. I know Ida isn't reckless in his decision making, but if he really is doing what I think he is doing, this will not end well. Midoriya thought before walking up to the two and placed his hand on Ida's shoulder. Listen Ida, if you have anything troubling you, don't hesitate to text or call me. I am your representative after all. Midoriya flashed a big grin to Ida. Yeah, what Deku said, Ida. Uraka jumped in with a huge smile on her face. Ida looked at his two friends and smiled. Thank you, both of you. I will do so if it ever comes to it. Anyways, farewell as my train is here. I'll see you guys in a week. Ida said and walked away from the group, waving goodbye as he boarded the train. Midoriya watched as Ida's train departed the station and had a story look on his face. Todoroki watched the situation from afar and also concluded that something was wrong with Ida, while also watching Midoriya. He gave one final look before boarding his train to his father's agency. I'll see you later Deku. Have fun at your agency, Uraka exclaimed as she entered her train and waved out the window at Midoriya, causing Midoriya to chuckle at her antics. He also sent off Yaoyorozu as she smiled and waved at him from her train as she left for her internship. It was just Midoriya and Shiozaki at the station as they both were seeing off people. Should we head over to the academy now, Midoriya? Shiozaki asked and the green-haired boy nodded. The two of them left the station and began to walk over to the academy, but then a thought came to Midoriya. Wait, how is All Might supposed to train with Shiozaki? I mean, with his condition, it won't be long until his secret is exposed to her. Can we trust her with that information? And what about Shinso? Can we trust him too? Damn it, there is too many things that could happen during this internship. Hopefully they have a plan for this. Maybe Principal Nezu will also be taking part of the internship. Either way, I'm still pretty nervous about All Might's former teacher. Guess I'll have to go with it for now. And quat. The two Class A students reached the academy, and Shinso was waiting at the front gate for them. He opened one of his eyes and kicked his foot off of the wall and approached the two. I've been waiting here for some time, but the teachers nor the principal has arrived. I wonder where they are. And quat. Shinso said as he looked around. Midoriya saw the scarf Aizawa gave him at the meeting and admired its composition. Shiozaki just looked around, playing with her vine-like hair as they waited for All Might or Aizawa, but no one arrived. This frustrated Shinso as he eventually kicked the gate in frustration. Did they just really set us up, and not even show up? What the fuck? Shinso growled out, causing Shiozaki's eyes to narrow at the brainwashing quirk user. She stomped right in front of him and glared at the boy. Excuse me, but could you refrain from using such vulgar language? Your disgusting voice is desecrating the holy aura around us. Oh, Lord, please forgive this young man's foul language. Please and thank you. And quat. Shiozaki concluded in making Shinso even more angry as he got up right into her face. Oh yeah, and what are you going to do if I don't? Shinso taunted her, and Shiozaki was about to remark, but Midoriya clasped a hand over her mouth, causing her to scramble wildly in his arms as she tapped him on the arms multiple times until he finally let her go. She scowled at Midoriya and huffed, turning away from the two boys before mumbling about being corrupted by boys or something along those lines. Midoriya sighed as the first day of the internship was already starting off with a bang. This can't get any better than this. And quat. He said, only to hear a loud metallic sound from underneath them. All three of them looked down and all of a sudden, the three were falling down a hole. Midoriya quickly looked up to see the opening close up, and they were still falling. Thinking quickly, he channeled lunar energy and used it to grab both of his companions, pulling them to him as he looked at Shiozaki. Can you create a soft landing with your vines, Shiozaki? He asked her. She nodded and quickly placed both of her hands together. Then she began to hum as vines began to shoot out of her hair and created a platform made of vines. It was getting closer and closer, causing the three to shut their eyes. Midoriya didn't want to take any risks and formed a lunar barrier around them just in case the vines weren't strong enough to cushion their fall. They landed on the vine platform and Shiozaki quickly launched more vines above them as they bounced off of the bottom vines and came into contact with the top ones, slowing their speed greatly. All of them landed on the bottom vines. Groans were heard as Midoriya clutched his head and looked around them, noticing that they were in a weird-looking hallway. He hopped off of the vine platform and looked around at the hallway, seeing fluorescent lights giving off some amount of light but nothing too serious. The other two joined Midoriya as they glanced around them. Where are we? Shiozaki questioned, looking at Midoriya with his hands glowing silver. He moved his hands towards the walls, not seeing anything in particular. I don't know, but most likely that it's a part of our internship. Like some sort of test of sorts. And quat. Midoriya said. The door in front of them suddenly opened as the trio shielded their eyes from the bright light that was protruding from the door. Once the light was dim enough, they looked in front of them, seeing All Might, Nezu, Aizawa, and some old-looking man that was about to Midoriya's chest at the most. Hello there, you three. I apologize for the drop earlier, but you managed to quickly come up with a plan. Very well done. Now then, shall we get started with the internship, or more accurately, your training? Nezu said and turned around, re-entering the area they just came from. Come on, you three. This will all be explained soon. Just hurry up and follow. And quat. Aizawa said and followed the bear-like creature. All Might chuckled loudly and flashed the three of them with his signature grin. Come now, let us begin. All Might and the old man also walked into the area, leaving the three students to be left in confusion. Midoriya watched the old man from behind and looked over him. So, that's who All Might was talking about. I don't get the same impression in terms of raw power, but can't underestimate anyone at this rate. And quat. Midoriya shook his head and sighed, then looked at his two companions. I think we should follow them if we want our questions answered. Let's go. And quat. Shinso and Shiozaki nodded and the three of them started walking in order to catch up to the group, starting their internships right then and there. Chapter 14, New Understandings. Midoriya watched as Shinso was taken to a different part of the underground area by Aizawa while him and Shiozaki were taken deeper into the area, following All Might, Nezu, and the mysterious old man through the hallways. They continued for a couple of minutes until they came across a set of doors, and they entered the room, seeing the training equipment, plus some extra stuff. Young Shiozaki, Will you please follow me into the other room? Nezu said and walked into one of the rooms that was connected to the main area. Shiozaki nodded and followed the bear creature into one of the rooms, leaving Midoriya, All Might, and the old man to the main room. So, Toshi, this is your successor to Ofa? Seems rather flabby if you ask me. The old man huffed, causing the hero to squirm in his place, and instilling fear into the young boy as he saw his mentor showing an uncanny fear. All Might tapped his fingers together nervously before laughing awkwardly and went over to Midoriya, then pushed him so that he was in front of the old man. The young boy was sweating as he shakily took out his hand and held it right in front of the old man. Hello there, my name is Izuku M. Midoriya. Midoriya bowed awkwardly as he held out his hand. The old man just stared at the hand before glancing up at All Might and sighed. Let me handle this, Toshi. The old man said. Young Midoriya, this is Gran Torino, my mentor and home teacher for a year at UA. He was also a close friend to my master and previous holder of Ofa. Anyways, he wanted to see your prowess of Ofa. All Might explained to Midoriya about his situation. Gran Torino only just huffed in annoyance before walking up to the young boy with his walking stick and started to examine the boy, before sighing and looked at Midoriya. Alright boy, fire off a smash at me, and without using your other quirk as a booster for it. Gran Torino said, causing the boy to look at him confused but nodded. He reeled his hand back, then punched a Detroit smash, but noticed that Gran Torino wasn't in front of him anymore and quickly turned around only to see the old man coming in at blinding speed. He ended up getting punched in the face and then kicked in the back, forcing the boy to the ground. 3 minutes boy, remember, don't use your other quirk. Gran Torino said as he watched the boy pick himself up, and he picked up his speed. Midoriya watched him zoom past him, creating streaks all around him as he tried to power up Ofa through his arm and tried to calculate where he would approach next. Gran Torino then rushed at him from the side, but Midoriya quickly turned and sent out another Detroit smash, but it still missed as Gran Torino used his jets to dodge the attack and got close to Midoriya before landing some good solid hits into his midsection. Midoriya coughed out as he struggled against the old man as All Might was watching the scene in front of him, seeing his student getting absolutely destroyed. Damn it. This guy is very combat adaptive and is quick on his feet. So this is All Might's homeroom teacher, and the close friend of the 7th Ofa holder. Midoriya gritted his teeth as he stood up once more and wiped some blood from his mouth as he started to concentrate on the battle, trying to figure out his plan of action, but it allowed Gran Torino to use those couple of seconds to quickly get into the defenseless boy and delivered a couple of swift jabs, knocking him onto the floor once more. All Might was biting his fingers in anticipation as a similar method was used on him when he was trained under the old man, but couldn't help but feel anxious for his student as he watched Gran Torino skid to halt in front of the boy. Your movements with your smashes are too rigid, too forced. You're focusing too much on your innate quirk and not on Ofa, which in turn is losing your grip and understanding of its power. You cast it aside like it's something that can be done. You're not properly using it to its potential. You're strong kid, I'll give you that, but the way you are now, you're years behind when it comes to inheriting Ofa. Gran Torino said before walking away from Midoriya, leaving behind a stunned All Might as the hero rushed over to the boy laying there. Are you okay, Midoriya? I'm sorry that Gran Torino is harsh, but ... Midoriya cut him off as he held up his hand and got up, groaning in pain at the beating, but took everything the old man had pointed out and clenched his fist in frustration. The green-haired boy looked at the ground as he picked himself up from the ground and turned to the hero. Is what he said true? Midoriya asked. The boy was obviously showing some amount of distress to the situation at hand, but he wanted to quickly get those situation at hand. All Might watched the boy's gaze fixate onto himself and then sighed, bringing his hand to his forehead before giving the boy a serious look. To honest, yes, Gran Torino stated pretty much everything that was inconsistent or wrong in the matter. I'll also state that you tend to unconsciously think that it's still my power. Remember Midoriya, Ofa isn't my power anymore. I passed it on to you as your own quirk so now you have to believe it is not an extension of yourself, but your entire being alongside celestial homage. All Might said, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder, trying to reassure the boy, but got no subtle response that it was the case. The hero all of a sudden heard laughter from the boy and panicked as he stepped back, watching the boy rise and saw his laughing face. All Might looked at Midoriya with confusion as the boy wiped some tears that were threatening the corners of his eyes. Wow, that sounded a lot more serious than the All Might I know. What did you do to him? Midoriya clutched his stomach as he continued to laugh, much to the disdain of the hero as it lasted for quite a while until finally Midoriya stopped and looked at All Might seriously. How do I properly use Ofa? All Might perked up and looked at the green-haired boy before placing his hand under his chin. It depends from holder to holder, but in general, you want to make it a part of you. You see, Ofa will appear in different forms. For me it's my current form. For you it's the vein-like empowerment in the areas that you use Ofa in. However, the difference between my control and your control is ... and quat. Something clicked in Midoriya's mind as he brought his hand to his face and powered Ofa through his hand, watching the familiar glow in his arm before noticing that there was a distinct cutoff point, and that was his elbow. My control is over a certain area, while yours is throughout your entire body. I see. Instead of placing everything I have in just a single area ... and quat. Midoriya said as he grunted, closing his eyes and began to concentrate on Ofa, visualizing it course throughout his entire body. Green electricity danced around his body as he felt the difference between his previous use of Ofa and now, which felt a lot more fluid in a sense. Midoriya glanced at his body, seeing the green lightning dance around his body, and clenched his fist, looking at All Might, who had a wide grin on his face as he saw his student grasp Ofa. So, Toshi managed to teach him something. Interesting ... and quat. Gran Torino said before walking out of the room. A small smile graced his lips. Midoriya looked around and then got into a fighting stance. He reeled his fist and sent out a Detroit smash, noticing that it was more powerful than the previous smashes that he had done against Gran Torino. Plus the numbness of those punches from earlier didn't feel as damaging as those other ones. He watched as the force from the punch collide with one of the targets for practice, and saw that it completely obliterated the target, and even made cracks to the wall 50 feet behind the dummy. Midoriya looked at the damage with shock before clenching his fist and smiled before he suddenly felt Ofa leave his body, causing his knees to buckle, and he started to fall. But his fall was broken when vines appeared to cushion his fall. He felt his entire body just shut down, and he felt incredibly exhausted from that one punch. Thanks Shiozaki ... and quat. He looked up at the vine girl walking towards him alongside Nezu and gently laid him down onto the ground. Shiozaki looked at him before sighing and went over to one of the rooms that was labeled as medical and went inside into the room, and then came out with a wet towel. She placed it on his forehead and looked at All Might before sighing, then started to pray for Midoriya's condition. Midoriya just smiled as he felt his energy slowly get back to him as he clenched his fist as if he was grasping something before looking at All Might and smiled at the hero, earning him a wide grin from the hero. Shiozaki secretly watched the two interact, taking note at their relationship and the words that Nezu had with her in the room they were in. Flashback Nezu's and Shiozaki's talk. Shiozaki walked into the room alongside Nezu and the door closed behind them, startling the girl. She sighed and then watched as the principal sat on the couch facing the wall and produced a remote out of nowhere and pushed a button, revealing an opening to the wall that showed the main area of the underground structure with Midoriya, All Might, and the old man still there. Shiozaki looked at the animal with confusion as he had some tea already in his hands, and then he looked over at her, then motioned to watch what was happening outside of the room. Young Shiozaki, what you're about to see is something that will have to stay a secret once you see it. Please keep that in mind. And quat. Nezu said, confusing Shiozaki, but she just nodded and sat down right beside the bear-like creature to watch what was about to happen. Nezu offered her a cup of tea, which she took it and thanked him before taking a sip from it. She then watched as Midoriya fought the old man, using moves that she never seen before, and watched as he was soundly defeated by the quickness of his opponent. Did you see young Midoriya? Nezu asked as he sipped some more of his tea. Shiozaki nodded and turned back to the little window. Yes sir, but, what was that glowing like effect on Midoriya's arm? That wasn't his quirks doing, right? So what is it? She asked the bear-like creature, who chuckled at her curiosity and placed his cup onto the table in front of them. That was Ofa. And quat. Shiozaki's face contorted into confusion as she saw Midoriya and All Might converse over something, but her mind was focused on the term that Nezu gave her for Midoriya's ability. She tried to make sense of what he meant, but nothing came up in her mind as she shook her head and looked at Nezu, completely lost. Ofa, what is that? She asked. Nezu just looked at the interaction between mentor and student before chuckling softly. Once they are done, you may go and ask Midoriya yourself. Like I said, once you know it, please make sure that the information you get will always stay a secret. Nobody should know what it is except for the people that already know about it. And quat. Nezu said. Shiozaki looked at him before placing her hand under her chin as sweat appeared on her forehead, and she was feeling quite anxious about Ofa. Just hearing Principal Nezu talk about it made her feel tense about it, and she didn't know why it did. She was brought out of her thoughts when she heard a loud crashing noise and the room shook as she looked to see Midoriya looking different with his green lightning around his body. She gasped when she saw the wall, seeing the cracks and destruction of said wall. Then she turned towards Midoriya, who was looking at the destruction he had caused. I believe this is a good time to go back out there, wouldn't you agree? You can get the information about Ofa and about the reality about young Midoriya and All Might as well. And quat. Shiozaki looked at him confused as the principal had included All Might, but she went ahead and opened the door to see Midoriya collapsing. She quickly sent vines to cushion his fall as she made her way over to him. Flashback and Shiozaki sighed and looked at Midoriya. She glanced at Nezu, who only smiled at her, and then caught a glimpse of All Might sweating. She cooled her nerves and then tapped Midoriya, getting the boy's attention. What is Ofa? Shiozaki asked, noticing the instant reaction of the boy as he had his mouth agape and his eyes were in disbelief. She saw the look that Midoriya gave to All Might, who was sweating even more now as smoke started to appear all over his body. The hero looked at Nezu, as if he wanted confirmation, and the creature nodded, causing a sigh from All Might to escape. The hero then looked over to Midoriya, and nodded to the boy. She watched Midoriya mouth something to the hero, and then he sighed before looking at Shiozaki, and all of a sudden, she saw more smoke coming from the hero as it covered him completely, and once it dissipated, she was appalled at what she saw. Instead of the buff hero that everyone knew, she now saw a lanky man with All Might's hero costume on. Who is that Midoriya? Shiozaki asked, confused and worried about what was to come. Toshinori sighed and picked at his clothing before walking over to Shiozaki and Midoriya. Listen, Shiozaki, this is something that never should be spoken outside of this circle. Not everyone knows this is how I look like in reality. And yes, I'm All Might, but this is my true form, and I assume Principal Nezu has mentioned Ofa to you in that room chat you guys had, correct? Toshinori asked, causing her to blink a couple of times before slowly nodding, still shaken up about all the things that was being revealed to her. He nodded and then looked at Midoriya. Are you alright, Midoriya? The green-haired boy nodded as he picked himself off of the ground, grunting in pain as his muscles felt stiff, causing Shiozaki to unconsciously grip his arm to help him up. Midoriya thanked her as he stood up, and began to stretch his entire body as Nezu walked up to the group. Since you'll be interning with me, Shiozaki, Principal Nezu thought that revealing Ofa and my current situation was the best course of action, as it would have been a chore to hide everything from you. Now, I'll start with my quirk, Ofa. You've heard about people trying to find out about everything about it, right? Toshinori asked, causing the girl to nod. It appears to give me super strength and speed, but in reality, it's much more than just those boosters. You see, this quirk, Ofa, has been passed down to me from someone else. One quirk for all people, that is how Ofa got its name, and it has the ability to stockpile power from its holder to holder. And quad. Toshinori explained to Shiozaki, taking a seat at one of the couches that were in the area. Then herself and Midoriya took a seat across from him while Nezu took his spot next to the hero. After a couple of minutes had passed as she was slowly taking everything in, she did have a question. The quirk, Ofa, how does this tie in with Midoriya? The two of you seem awfully close. And quad. She trailed off, a faint blush on her cheeks as she looked over at Midoriya, who was surprised, but then sighed and looked over at Toshinori, who nodded to the boy, then looked over at the vine girl. As All Might explained, Ofa is one quirk for all people. That means this quirk has been passed down from person to person. What it means is that Shiozaki's eyes widened as she finished his statement. It was passed from person to person? So that means Ofa isn't an innate quirk, but one that can be passed down. Then if that's the case, then that means that this wasn't All Might's quirk to begin with? And if that's the case, does that mean you're the current holder of this quirk, Midoriya? Shiozaki asked, looking at the boy for confirmation, and when he nodded, she had a look of shock. She was beginning to get overwhelmed by all of these sudden revelations, but Midoriya placed his hand on her shoulder and began to send calming pulses throughout her body. She looked at him before smiling a little and thanked him before placing her hand underneath her chin. I've never heard of passing a quirk from person to person, nor the fact that someone can have more than one quirk, but I guess you're special, Midoriya. But wait, why does All Might look like that? How come he isn't all buff? Her eyes landed on the hero, who squirmed a little from her gaze, but sighed as he clasped his hands together in front of him. Listen, my time as the number one hero is almost over. As I said before, this is my true form and I can't change that. Once more, Ofa isn't my quirk anymore, as I've passed it down to young Midoriya here and now. The last remaining embers of it is slowly disappearing. I have a limit on how much I can use Ofa. Now I have only 3 hours to do hero work, so I try and make sure not to use all of it at once. That is why I'm in this condition. And now I have an obligation to usher in the new generation of heroes as soon as possible. Shiozaki, I would like for you to also help in my endeavors, and I would like for you to help Midoriya out, as you guys seem to have a solid relationship. And quad. Toshinori said, looking at the two young heroes as he lowered his hands. Shiozaki looked troubled but then looked at the hero and nodded, surprising Midoriya. If that is what wish, it would be my pleasure to help the number one hero. I pray that new generation will be even more successful than your time, and I suppose Midoriya here is trying to take the title you possess, She sent a sly gaze over at the green-haired boy, who smiled at her and nodded. Toshinori couldn't help but smile as he stood up and placed his hand on Shiozai's shoulder. I'm expecting great things from the three of you, but please, don't tell Shinso until the time is right. That goes to you as well, Midoriya. And quad. He said, and the two of them nodded. Right on cue, Shinso and Aizawa came into the area, beads of sweat dripping down his forehead, and he was panting heavily while Aizawa still had his bored look on his face. I'm done with him for the day. I believe it is time for them to go patrol the area. They're going to need the experience for the future. And quat, Aizawa said, causing the three of them to perk up at the mention of patrolling the city. Then, he laid eyes on Toshinori and grunted out in disbelief before looking over at Shinso, who was looking at Toshinori as if trying to deduce the identity of him. Shinso, this man right over there is a man working with UA and he has agreed to look over the internships of Shiozaki and Midoriya as an observer. That is why he is here today, plus he wanted to catch a glimpse of the future generation. And quat, Aizawa blatantly lied. Everyone looked at him weirdly except for Shinso, who took it as it is and nodded. I see. Anyways, you said something about patrolling the area. So, can we start heading out? Shinso said, twirling his scarf as he looked at the erasure hero. Aizawa looked at him before turning his gaze to Nezu, who nodded happily and produced yet another remote, then pressed one of the buttons. It revealed some doors located in one of the walls, and once it fully opened, it revealed a space with a panel at the center of it. You three may go once you've put on your hero costumes. Please change in one of the rooms and here are your costumes. And quat. The principal pressed another button and 3 suitcases appeared from the ground on some pedestals. The three of them looked at each other before grabbing their hero costumes and walked into one of the rooms to change. Once they were in the rooms, Aizawa sighed and then turned to Toshinori. A scowl appeared on his face. So, you just had to run out of time. What a pain. And quat, Aizawa said, scratching his head in annoyance while Toshinori scratched his cheek sheepishly. Thanks for covering for me, Aizawa. Don't thank me yet, now you have something to worry about now. Anyways, let's just get this patrol done. And quat, he said, and the three of them were done changing. Midoriya looked at the gauntlets that now came with his costume and looked over at Nezu. Ah, yes, your gauntlets were made by Hatsume to help you concentrate your quirk, she said. It was on her. And quat, Nezu said, causing Midoriya to nod as he looked at it, and he looked at his costume, especially the moving celestial sun now that it had an added effect of green lightning dancing around it, which looked really cool. Once they were done with doing last-minute checks with their costumes, they went over to the secret elevator. Just hit that panel and it should take you to the city. And here you go. And quat, Aizawa handed them scanners and told them to place it next to their ear while the screen was over their eyes. These were also designed by Hatsume. It allows us to communicate with you and send data to you via the screen. And also, you can communicate with Hatsume as well in case anything has happened that requires mechanical work. Once you're done with patrol, which your route will be given to you once you've reached the surface, she had requested that the three of you head over to the Department of Support workshop, especially you Midoriya. She wanted to have someone help her with her babies, or so she says. Anyways, head to the surface. And quat, Midoriya nodded, still nervous about Hatsume's request, but he went with it as the three of them headed towards the surface. Once they were there, a map appeared on their screen showing a route that they should take. This is your route. Remember, you cannot use your quirks even against villains unless it is absolutely necessary. Good luck and be careful. And quat, Aizawa's voice was heard from the communicator. Once he was done talking, the three of them looked at each other before nodding and they stepped out into the surface, seeing the familiar academy behind them. Well, I guess we should start. And quat, Shinso said as he began to follow the route. Shiozaki and Midoriya looked at each other before sprinting to catch up to their third companion. Chapter 15, The Internship. Midoriya watched the endless stream of people as they walked along the streets, noting at how busy people were at this time of day. Shinso was ahead of him as he lazily looked around the area while Shiozaki was fiddling with her communication device. The three of them traversed the streets, helping out people if they needed it while maintaining the peace around the route they were ordered to. Midoriya was also practicing controlling his OFA by powering up his entire body with it and then deactivating it. He continued to do this for some time, and even overexerted himself from doing so. Sorry about that you guys. And quat, Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck as Shinso grumbled and leaned on a lamppost as he watched the area while Shiozaki sighed and created a vine bed for him to lay on as they continued their patrol. After waiting for Midoriya to recover with the help of the sun, they continued on their route, and soon finished the route. Aizawa was standing right at the gate when they arrived, holding a clipboard in his hands and was writing something on the paper. He looked up from it once he sensed their presence and then ushered them to follow him inside the academy. Good work out there, you three, however. And quat, he eyed Midoriya dangerously, causing the green-haired boy to gulp nervously as they continued onward. The sounds of the general students in their classes ran through the hallways. They continued on for some time until they came across the support department and stopped right in front of the large metal door. Aizawa checked off on the paper and handed Midoriya the paper before walking past them, heading off towards the teacher's lounge. Midoriya eyed the paper as he looked at it before sighing heavily and handed it over to Shinso while Shiozaki looked it upside down. Shinso clicked his tongue in annoyance while Shiozaki furrowed her eyebrows when they saw that it was a grating on their patrol. Too brooding, not exactly approachable? That's pretty dumb, if you ask me. And quat, Shinso muttered as he handed the paper to Shiozaki, and she gingerly grabbed it, looking over at her grading. She shook her head and handed it back to Midoriya. All mine was using my quirk in public without a license. Other than that, our patrol was given a pretty good rating, but this is Mr. Aizawa grading us on how we perform, so we have to do better on those patrols from now on. Now, this Hatsume girl wants to see us. Shall we proceed then? Shiozaki finished. Midoriya nodded and walked up to the door, only to get this uneasy feeling from it and then quickly dove out of the way as a large explosion launched the door out of its hinges, propelling the metallic entrance into the wall across the way. A feminine laugh rang inside the little dust cloud as Power Loader came out of the workshop, grumbling angrily as he gazed at the destruction. Hatsume, how many times must you destroy the entrance? This is the third time you've done this in 2 weeks. The hero yelled out angrily as the dust settled, revealing the first-year inventor in all of her glory. Scorch marks and soot covered her clothing as she got up and had the biggest smile on her face. Midoriya blinked several times before sighing and got the attention of the two. Hatsume's smile grew even wider as she seemingly teleported over to him and once again ignored all personal space Midoriya had. Her face was beaming with happiness and enthusiasm. Midoriya squirmed under her gaze, causing Shinso to snicker behind his hand while Shiozaki eyed the damage that was caused by the explosion in the workshop. Power Loader face palmed before looking over at Midoriya and then quickly grabbed a bag, presumably Hatsume's, and placed it in the boy's hands. Hey, Midoriya, if you could get her away from the workshop for a bit, I would tremendously be grateful to you. I need some time to myself, and a couple of beers. And quat. The hero mumbled as he walked back into the workshop. Midoriya sighed as he handed Hatsume her stuff and waited for her to finish preparations. Anyways, you needed us for something, Hatsume? Midoriya asked the pink-haired girl as they walked to a secluded area. Eventually, they found secluded area with some tables in the vicinity and they all sat down at one of the tables. Then Hatsume dug through her bag until she pulled out her laptop and placed it on the table. The reason I asked for you was that I can improve your communications device and some of your hero costumes, more specifically, the two of you. She pointed at Shinso and Shiozaki, causing them to focus in on her as she effortlessly typed at her computer, pulling up many different schematics for each of them before turning the computer around and showed them. These are some of the designs I had in mind. Now, for you, Midoriya, I was meaning to ask about your new hero costume, the gauntlets to be exact. Can I see you use your quirk with them? Hatsume asked. Midoriya nodded and stood up, but Hatsume quickly held up her hand and produced a small box from her bag. Pressing the box, she threw it quite a ways from them and it sprung out, revealing a target dummy. She nodded to Midoriya and he aimed his palm at the target, powering the solar energy in his hand before firing off a ray, piercing the dummy with ease and leaving a burning hole in the head. He looked at the glove in astonishment before switching his gaze to the inventor, who had a look of success as she skipped over to him happily. The gauntlets changes how my attacks are launched, correct? Midoriya asked. Hatsume smiled and nodded before gripping the gauntlets from below. She turned it over to the side and pointed at the main button. You hit it right on the head. The gauntlets allow for a more concentrated attack, just like how your beam of light pierced through the head of the target. Normally, your attack would have just blown it up to smithereens, but now, you can penetrate even the toughest of metals with these little babies of mine. The button here changes the firing mode from normal to concentrated, so if you want your big explosions, then press the button. These are prototypes, so I'll be gathering data on them remotely, unless you destroy them in a fight, of course. Hatsume grinned before going over to Shinso and Shiozaki to note which one of her designs that they liked, then she wrote stuff that each of them requested for each of their costumes. After all of that was finished, she grinned widely before stretching her arms up, sighing in relief as a few audible pops were heard. She then smiled at the three of them and she patted her stomach. I'm hungry, let's go eat somewhere, Hatsume yelled out, and on K, the other three stomachs growled in hunger. Midoriya sighed before looking at his two companions and then nodded. Hatsume beamed with happiness as she quickly packed everything into her bag, including the target dummy now in box form once again. Then, the four of them walked off of the campus area, with the approval of Aizawa through the communication device, and headed out to find a suitable place. They traveled around Mustafa until Midoriya suggested that they go to his choice for ramen. They soon entered into the ramen shop and once again, the owner of the place greeted Midoriya warmly and then looked over at the other three. Ah, you three were also in the festival tournament, correct? Please, do enjoy the food, she said as she sped off to the back of the place. They found some seating relatively close to the entrance and sat down, with the two boys on one side, the girls the other, and they looked through the menu while Hatsume once more brought out her laptop. She then began to work her stuff as the waitress come over. After ordering their drinks and what they wanted, Midoriya took out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until stopping at Yaoyorozu's picture and pressed on it before he began to type. Hey, how's your internship going? A few seconds later, a message popped up on his phone from Yaoyorozu. Hello there Izuku. As for my internship, it's rather unique to say the least. But it's still a very interesting experience going out and patrolling the region with Itsuka as a fellow internee. Midoriya smiled and responded to her message. So, Kendo is with you? I'm actually surprised she would join Iwabami. I would have thought she would go to one that focuses on the front lines and not capture, but I guess experiencing different areas of a hero's job broadens your views and you can cover more your bases. Shinso nudged Midoriya, grabbing his attention away from his phone, and gestured towards the food. He thanked him and placed his phone on the table before grabbing his chopsticks. They all said their thanks and dug into their ramen, slurping the noodles and soup, sighing in content as they all enjoyed their food and engaged in small conversation, mainly focusing on the internships and the communications device. Hatsume asked for feedback as she quickly scarfed down her noodles and wrote down their feedback at the same time. The mechanic listened in intuitively as she acquired each of their opinions. Shiozaki was rather confused with the lack of directions, so Hatsume spent a couple of minutes to explain the functions of the device, making sure everything was clear for her. Shinso simply asked if it was going to affect his quirk, which Hatsume quickly shut down as she glared at him with her smile still on her face, causing Midoriya to gulp a little. Shinso just grunted and said that it was fine for him. Well, Midoriya? Hatsume said enthusiastically, leaning over the table, causing Shiozaki to cry out in disbelief as the pinkette's body blocked access to her ramen, but she didn't notice as her attention was all on the green-haired boy. Midoriya watched as Shiozaki's face fell and chuckled before looking at the eager face of his teammate from the festival. He tapped his chin before grabbing the device from his pocket and placed over his eye, the familiar interface showing up as he continued to look at Hatsume. I think this is a great asset to our patrols, however, there is more to this thing than what Mr. Aizawa said, right Hatsume? Midoriya slyly looked over at the mechanic and watched as her face light up with interest as she grabbed her laptop, then went over to Midoriya's side and placed it in front of him. His eyes widened as he saw the intricate camera views that she had, including the views of all three of them and then some others as well. She also had other data that he couldn't figure out, but what caught his eye was the maps that occupied the right side of the screen and it showed the route that they took. Shinso looked over and Shiozaki also got up from her seat as all of them looked at the screen. Hatsume, still with her smile, began to type away as she started to bring up multiple shots of their route and then she stepped back. With your devices, I am able to monitor all of your guys' progress during your patrols, and I can also act as an sort of overseer. You see where I'm going with this? She asked, getting nods from all three of them. She smiled and closed her laptop before going over to the cashier to pay for her portion of the meal. Anyways, I have to head back to start on another project that needs my attention, and maybe then I can work on my babies. And quad. She laughed quietly as she exited the building, leaving the team to themselves. They all followed suit and paid before walking out, seeing the sun setting in the distance. Midoriya's phone buzzed and he fished it out of his pocket, seeing that the caller ID was Aizawa and quickly answered. Hello? Midoriya had the phone on speaker as the three of them huddled to hear. Midoriya, come back to the school grounds. I'll meet you guys at the entrance. And quad. The call ended as soon as it started, causing Midoriya to sigh as he pocketed his phone and looked at his two companions. They nodded and the three of them walked back to the academy, seeing the familiar hero waiting at the entrance to the academy. As they walked up to him, Midoriya caught a glimpse of something in the hero's hands, but he didn't think much of it as they stopped in front of him. Good, you're all here, as you should be, anyways, catch. And quad. He threw whatever was in his hands at the three of them, each catching the object. It was a key with the school's symbol on it. That's a key to the entrance that you guys will be entering each day for your interns. You may leave for the day. Good work to all of you. And quad. Aizawa said before walking past the gates and into the academy, leaving the three students to the rest of the waning day. They all looked at each other before saying their goodbyes to each other and walked home. The end of the first day of internships had concluded without problems or interruptions. Midoriya checked his messages, seeing that there was no new ones. He sighed as he pocketed the device, slightly disappointed that Ida did not message him, even though deep down he knew that his friend wasn't going to speak his mind. I hope Ida doesn't do anything reckless. I'm sure he knows not to do anything that would put him at risk. At least, I hope that's the situation. And quad. Midoriya said out loud as he strolled through the park, taking the shortcut to his house. A breeze picked up a bit as he walked past the kids' playground, leaves blowing along the wind. He saw the familiar-looking household and rushed up to the doorstep, opening the door to hear voices in the living room. Midoriya cocked his head to the side and walked further into the house, the voices increasing in volume. He could make out multiple females' voices, one of which was his mom, the other. Izuku? He stopped as Yaoyorozu came into view, wearing an apron and holding a mixing bowl. A smile appeared on her face as Inko appeared from behind her and smiled as she saw Midoriya. Ah, son, you're here. Your other friend is here as well. She chimed in, clasping her hands together as she went into the kitchen to continue the preparations for dinner. Midoriya looked at Yaoyorozu expecting an answer from her, but the said person appeared right behind her. "Jiro?" Midoriya said unexpectedly, watching a smile grow on her face as she waved at him, holding one of her jacks in her hands. "Yo Deku, your mother invited us to eat dinner with you guys. Jiro said, looking at Yaoyorozu with a sly smile causing her to blush as she cleared her throat. "Our internships ended around the same time, so we were going to eat somewhere to eat. We happened to run into your mother along the way, and then she recognized me because you know. Yaoyorozu said, mumbling the last part, but it was clearly heard by the two other occupants of the hallway. Jiro just chuckled as she went into the kitchen to help Inko bring in some of the dishes, leaving the two lovebirds alone in the hallway. Midoriya smiled as he passed her, pecking her on the cheek before walking over to his room and placed his stuff on his bed before changing out of his clothes to put on some housewear. Once he finished freshening himself up, he made his way to the living room, seeing the table already set up with their dinner and everyone else, besides him, were already seated waiting on him. Yaoyorozu patted the seat next to her while Jiro smiled from her seat next to his mother, who was smiling widely at the scene in front of her. "Sorry for keeping you guys waiting. Midoriya said as he sat down, before saying his thanks and waited for everyone else to do the same to start eating. Once they said their thanks, they began to dig into their food, sighing in content as they savored the taste of the food. Inko smiled as she watched them enjoy her cooking, pride swelling up as she dug in herself. The four engaged in small talk, mainly focusing around the internships. All we did was watch Uwabami do some beauty commercials. We did get to patrol around the area and she explained her role in villain capture. It was nice to internship with Itsuka, as we get to see each other more frequently during the internships. Watching her in action was very beautiful to say the least. It goes to show why she was chosen as the Class B representative. Yaoyorozu explained to Midoriya, with Jiro listening while Inko was busy cleaning up some of the dishes. "I see. Well, how about you, Jiro? Anything happen in your internship?" Jiro perked up as she looked at Midoriya before placing her hand underneath her chin. She shook her head as she took a sip of her drink, and then looked at the green-haired boy. "My internship was just the basics and an introduction to the hero business. It was very informative, would have fit right in your alley, Deku. Anyways, what about you? You're staying at the academy to do intern with All Might along with Shiozaki, right? How is it?" Jiro fired off. "Tutelage under All Might was very interesting. It's pretty interesting with Shiozaki there, and also Shinso was there, under Mr. Aizawa. We did some quirk training and then we patrolled the area around the academy. Of course Mr. Aizawa graded us on the patrol and wanted more. After that, here we are, I suppose. Midoriya recounted his patrol to the two classmates, earning chuckles from the two when he went over the reasons that they were taken off for. They also went over some other stuff about the internships until Midoriya grabbed the remote from the table and turned on the TV, seeing that it on a news outlet. Midoriya's eyes widened as the words scrolled across the screen. "The hero killer strikes again, huh? This time in Hasu, this guy is intense. Jiro said, listening in to what the reporter lady had to say. "In Hasu, where the hero killer's vigilante attacks continue, this time, the latest victim is the hero Ingenium. No further details have come up, but it is only a matter of time before the next attack will occur. Midoriya didn't pay attention to the last bit as he bit his thumb. Yaoyorozu watched him as he dug into his pocket and pulled out his phone, seeing the look of anguish on his face. Then, her mind recalled the name of the victim. Ingenium, that's the hero alias for Ida's brother, isn't it? I've heard him talk about his brother a couple of times in class. To think, his brother was attacked, that's why he was acting like that during the festival and the days before the internships. And you've known about this, right?" Yaoyorozu looked at her boyfriend with a calculating gaze, his silence confirming her question. "Man, that's crazy. Glasses has it rough, but still, to bottle those emotions up is nuts. Jiro stated. Midoriya could only nod as he stared at his phone screen, seeing no text from Ida, which only put more stress on the boy. "I suppose you've figured out what Ida is going to do from here on out, as well. Yaoyorozu said, placing her hand on Midoriya's shoulder and rubbed it affectionately, trying to calm him down. Midoriya looked up from his phone and gave her a smile before placing it on the table, sighing as he was trying to find his words. "Not so much as figuring it out, but more of predicting the future. As much as I don't want to believe it, I think that Ida is trying to get close to the hero killer's location to try and enact revenge for his brother. Mind you that this is speculation and I know Ida enough that he wouldn't do something so reckless. Midoriya said, looking at his two classmates with uncertainty. "I think that's excellent speculation. After all, Ida interned with the Manual, who's stationed in Hasu. I'm pretty sure that Ida got better intern options than Manual, but we can't make that assumption just yet. Has he contacted you yet?" Yaoyorozu asked. Midoriya shook his head and twiddled his thumbs together. Whatever the case is, I'm worried for his safety. I might go and report this to Mr. Aizawa tomorrow. Anyways, I forgot to ask, why were you guys in Mustafa? Isn't your guys' internships are elsewhere? My internship is rather close to Jiro's, so we decided to travel together here to get some stuff from our houses and then travel back in the morning tomorrow. Anyways, I think we should head home, Jiro. And Quat. Yaoyorozu said, looking at Jiro, who nodded, and the two of them made their way to the entrance with Midoriya right behind them. It was nice seeing you, Deku. I'll see you later, Jiro said as she walked out of his view, leaving Yaoyorozu in front of him. She smiled at him and pecked him on the lips, her lips lingering on his for a couple of seconds before separating. She then embraced him and placed her chin on his shoulder. Whatever you do, please make sure you don't get yourself hurt again. You have a knack for doing dangerous stunts, and please, let me know if you're going to be helping Ida as I'd like to help him too. And Quat. Yaoyorozu said and released him from her embrace, smiling once more before catching up to Jiro and walked off to their houses. Midoriya watched them from his door before closing it and letting out a huge sigh. Man, this week is about to be very intense. And Quat. He said before retiring the night. The next day, Midoriya met up with Shiozaki and Shinso in front of the academy as the sun was just rising. He inserted his key into the designated area where Aizawa told them as such when they had arrived before he went off to somewhere. He unlocked the door and opened the door for his companions. Shinso nodded and walked in while Shiozaki smiled, waiting for him once he closed the door. They found themselves and so did Hatsume, as she was standing in front of them, her usual crazed smile present on her face. Hey Midoriya, Mr. Aizawa wanted me to tell you something. Something about Ida or whatever the guy with glasses is called. Midoriya's eyes widened a little and quickly walked up to her, grabbing her shoulders with both of his hands, startling the mechanic a bit, but brushed it off like it was nothing. What did Mr. Aizawa say to you, Hatsume? Midoriya asked, realizing that he held Hatsume by her shoulders and quickly released her, saying a quick apology to her. She laughed and waved him off before turning around and walked further into the area, motioning for them to follow her. Midoriya was the first one to go after her, immediately followed by Shiozaki, and lastly, Shinso begrudgingly followed. Their footsteps echoes in the corridor that they were in. Hatsume slowed her pace down so that Midoriya could catch up to her. Once he did, she began to talk. Mr. Aizawa said you would realize what Ida was doing when he interned with Manuel and Hasu as he knew about the attack that the hero killer was responsible for. He wanted to know what you were going to do when you figured it out. And Quat. Hatsume explained, her tone serious and straight to the point. I see, so Mr. Aizawa also had a hunch about Ida's unusual behavior. As for what I'm doing, I don't know actually. My internship requires me here, unless ... And Quat. Midoriya turned and saw a grin form on Hatsume's face as she sprinted forward, coming up to a door at the end of the seemingly long hallway. Bingo, Midoriya. Yesterday, I was busy making some surveillance equipment. I think my babies are very perfect. Anyways, Mr. Aizawa had me create some of these babies for surveillance, especially over Hasu. I made plenty of these and sent them all over the country, monitoring everyone's progress. The teachers also come here ever so often to make sure that everything is a-okay, Hatsume exclaimed, opening the door and quickly making her way over to the large screen in the middle of the room. The three companions made their way over to her, admiring the equipment in the room. Midoriya then stood beside the pink-haired girl and looked at the screen, seeing many of his classmates at their internships. But his main focus was the one with Ida on it, as he was with Manuel at the agency going over some stuff. Midoriya furrowed his brows as he saw the lack of interest on Ida's face, as if his mind was somewhere else as the pro-hero continued to talk. Hey Hatsume, what does these camera look like? Midoriya asked, causing her to perk up with interest as she dug into her bag and pulled out camera that looked a lot like a ladybug, but metal of course. It looked rather hard to catch, but still was able to record something some distance from it, and the camera didn't look all that big either. Beautiful, isn't it? Anyways, here it is, what do you think? Hatsume asked. I think this isn't bad, but the privacy though ... And Quat. Shiozaki muttered, earning a small glare from the pink cat, while Shinso just grunted, shrugging. Midoriya just looked at the screen, seeing everyone working hard at their internships. So, in a way, you're our eyes, Hatsume? Midoriya asked. Yup, Mr. Aizawa and Principal Nezu has allowed you to know this sort of information. This is the deal I made with them, as it allows me to show off my babies and prowess when it comes to inventing. And, once this is done, I'll get to meet some of the companies that sponsor heroes and UA. I get to show off my babies, she said before turning back and began to type away at the keyboard. You guys have your communication device with you? I sent you the data of stuff you'll need, and also established a link between me and the three of you, so you can chat with each other on the field, just in case. You should get going to your internship area, Just take the elevator over there and you should be well on your way, Hatsune said before turning back towards the screen. Midoriya thanked her and walked over to the elevator, waiting as Shinso and Shiozaki entered it as well. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting a bad vibe when I think about the rest of this week. And quote. Shinso said. Shiozaki nodded and then looked at Midoriya before closing her eyes, letting out a sigh. As of what we know, something is going to happen sometime during this week. Problem is, we don't know what or when this is going to happen. And the information we have now, it's pointing to a confrontation with the hero killer. And quote. Shiozaki said as she pressed the button, going to the lowest floor as it was the only option. Shinso grunted as he stared off with his arms crossed. Midoriya could only ponder her words as they descended into day 2 of their internship. Well, it seems like you've made it to the end of part 4-2. What if Deku could control the sun and moon? But anyways, this is Amaterasu signing out for today, and I wish all of you a wonderful day/night. Bye.